The rain hit the windows of La Serra like secrets trying to get in. Inside, the restaurant hummed with the kind of quiet tension money and fear create together. Crystal glasses caught the dim light. Silverware gleamed against white tablecloths. Everything looked expensive because it was. Everything felt dangerous because of who owned it. Dante Morelli walked through the door like he owned the night itself. His coat dripped rainwater on marble floors that had seen blood before they'd seen champagne. Two men followed behind him, shadows in suits, hands always near their waists. The hostess stuttered through her greeting. The bartender's hand shook as he poured scotch nobody ordered yet. Everyone knew who Dante was. Everyone knew what he could do with a single word. He moved through the restaurant the way storms move through valleys. Inevitable, unstoppable. His table was always ready. His food was always perfect. His presence always made the room smaller. But tonight, something different happened. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The waitress assigned to his table wasn't trembling. She wasn't smiling too wide or avoiding his eyes. She just walked up with a notepad and a face that suggested she'd seen men like him before and survived the experience. Good evening, she said. Her voice was calm. Not warm, not cold. Just there. Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. His men exchanged glances. The room held its breath. What's your name? He asked. Alara. Pretty name. He smiled, the kind of smile that usually made people melt or run. Tell me something, Alara. You look like someone who knows things. What's your advice for a man trying to win a woman's heart? His men chuckled on cue. It was a joke, a game. He was testing her, the way predators test prey before they strike. But Alara didn't laugh. She didn't blush or giggle or play along. She just looked at him with eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by power. Then she spoke. Start by not assuming she wants to be charmed. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of people pretending not to listen. The stunned silence of witnesses watching something impossible unfold. One of Dante's men actually stopped breathing for a second. The bartender dropped an ice cube. Even the rain seemed to pause against the glass. Dante's smile faded slowly, like smoke dissipating. He stared at her, really looked at her, past the apron and the tired eyes, past the walls she'd built from years of surviving men who thought power meant permission. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She just stood there, notepad ready, waiting for his order like she'd said nothing more shocking than the evening specials. What would you recommend? He finally asked, his voice different now. Quieter, almost respectful. The truth, she said. But most people here can't stomach it. Then she walked away, just turned and walked toward the kitchen like she hadn't just disarmed the most dangerous man in the city with nothing but honesty. Dante sat frozen. His men didn't know whether to laugh or call for backup. The other diners pretended to focus on their meals while their ears strained to hear what would happen next. But nothing happened. Dante Morelli, who'd silenced rooms with violence and controlled empires with fear, said nothing at all. He just watched her disappear through the kitchen doors, his scotch untouched, his carefully constructed world tilting on an axis he didn't recognize. For the first time in years, someone had disarmed him. Not with a weapon, not with a threat, with nothing but truth delivered in a voice that refused to worship at the altar of his power. And somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he'd thought died long ago, something stirred. Something that felt almost like respect, almost like fear, almost like the first crack in armor he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it wasn't skin. For the first time in years, someone had disarmed him with nothing but truth. Would you have dared speak to a Mafia boss like that? Tell me in the comments below. Dante came back 3 nights later. Nobody expected it. Mafia bosses didn't return to restaurants because of waitresses. They returned because of business, because of territory, because someone needed reminding who owned what. But here he was, same table, same coat, different excuse. Meeting a contact, he told his men. The contact never showed up. Alara served him without ceremony. Water, menu, specials. Her hands moved efficiently, like she'd done this 1,000 times before. Because she had. Night after night, smile after smile, pretending exhaustion didn't live in her bones. "You come here often?" Dante asked, immediately regretting how stupid it sounded. "I work here," she said flatly. "So yes." His men shifted uncomfortably. Nobody talked to their boss like this. Nobody treated him like he was ordinary. But she did. Week after week, he kept coming back. Always alone now, no entourage, no theatrics. Just a man who ordered pasta and watched a woman who refused to see him as anything special. The staff whispered in the kitchen. The manager started sweating through his shirts, wondering if the boss was angry about something, planning something, building towards some terrible conclusion. They didn't understand what Dante himself barely understood. He was fascinated, not by her beauty, though she had that quiet kind that sneaks up on you. Not by her body, though men had surely noticed. He was fascinated by her complete immunity to his power. She looked at him the way you'd look at any other customer. Polite, professional, unmoved. Every other person in his life wanted something. His soldiers wanted protection and money. His enemies wanted him dead. Women wanted his wealth, his danger, his name. Everyone performed for him, with him, around him. Alara just wanted to finish her shift and go home. "Why do you work so hard?" he asked one night, after most of the restaurant had emptied. She paused, plates balanced on her arm. "Because bills don't care about my feelings. You could have an easier life." "Could I?" She looked at him, then really looked, and he saw something flicker behind her eyes. Something that might have been anger or might have been grief. "People like me don't get easier. We get by." Then she walked away again, leaving him with words that cut deeper than she probably meant them to. His driver asked him once why they kept coming back to La Serra. There were better restaurants, fancier places, establishments where the owner actually appreciated his patronage. Dante didn't answer. Because how do you explain that you've spent your whole life being feared, and you've finally found someone who isn't afraid? How do you admit that power feels hollow when someone looks through it like glass? He watched her laugh once with the cook through the kitchen window. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind she never gave the dining room. It transformed her face completely, made her look younger, made her look like someone who might have been happy once in another life, before whatever happened to carve that permanent exhaustion into her features. He wanted to know what made her laugh. He wanted to know what made her sad. He wanted to know everything. And that wanting terrified him more than any enemy ever had. Because Dante Morelli didn't want things. He took them. But you can't take someone who won't be owned. The staff stopped whispering about when he'd leave and started whispering about when she'd crack. When she'd finally smile at him the way desperate people smile at powerful men. When she'd trade her dignity for his money. They'd be waiting a long time. Alara had learned years ago that survival meant keeping walls high and expectations low. Men like Dante came and went. Money came and went. Pain was the only reliable thing in this world. But fascination, when left unchecked, always turns into something more dangerous. What would you do if power started chasing you instead of protecting you? Drop your thoughts below. The rain started just before closing, the kind that turns streets into rivers and soaks through coats in seconds. Alara finished her side work while water hammered the windows. She counted tips, wiped tables, reset salt shakers. The manager locked the front door and disappeared into his office. The cook left through the back. She was alone now, pulling on a jacket too thin for weather like this. Dante's car idled outside. She noticed it the moment she stepped out. Black sedan, engine running, headlights cutting through the downpour. The back window rolled down. "Get in." Not a request. Not quite a command either. Something in between. "I'm fine walking," she said. "In this." He leaned forward so she could see his face. "You'll drown before you reach the corner." "I've walked through worse." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" He paused. Rain soaked through her hair, her shoulders. She didn't move toward the car. Didn't move away either. "The point is you shouldn't have to," he said quietly. She almost laughed. Almost told him that men like him were the reason women like her had to walk home in storms. But she was tired. Bone tired. Soul tired. The kind of tired that makes you stop fighting battles you know you'll lose anyway. "I don't need saving," she said. "I'm offering a ride, not salvation." Something about the way he said it made her hesitate. Not the words themselves, but the tone underneath. Like maybe he understood the difference. She got in. They drove in silence through flooded streets. Water sprayed against the windows. The driver knew where she lived without being told. Of course he did. Men like Dante always knew things they shouldn't. "Here's fine," she said, 3 blocks from her actual apartment. "I know where you live, Ilera. Then you know I want you to stop here." He nodded to the driver. The car pulled over. She reached for the door handle, then stopped. "Why do you keep coming back?" "To the restaurant." "To me." He looked at her for a long moment. Rain drummed against metal and glass. "I'm still trying to figure that out." She left without another word. Dante watched her walk away through sheets of rain. Watched her turn down an alley. Watched her stop at a building with broken steps and graffiti-covered walls. Then he watched the door open. A man stood there. Older, heavy, swaying drunk. He grabbed her arm before she could slip past. Yanked her inside. Even through the rain and distance, Dante heard her cry out. He was out of the car before his driver could react. The building's lobby smelled like mold and broken promises. He took the stairs 3 at a time, following sounds of struggle. A door hung open on the second floor. The drunk had her against the wall, one hand around her throat, slurred words about bills and disrespect, and worthless daughters who thought they were too good to show gratitude. Dante moved like violence itself. 1 second the man was standing. The next he was on the floor, gasping, Dante's knee on his chest, and his fist cocked back ready to end this permanently. "Don't," Ilera whispered. Dante looked at her. Really looked. Her neck was red where fingers had pressed. Her eyes were wet, but not crying. Not anymore. Like she'd used up all her tears long ago. "He's hurting you." "I know." "Then why?" "Because that man is my father." Dante's fist froze midair. The drunk coughed and wheezed beneath him. Rain hammered the building's roof. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Ilera stood against the wall, arms wrapped around herself, looking at them both with the kind of exhaustion that comes from choosing between bad and worse every single day. "Let him go," she said. Dante stood slowly. The drunk scrambled away, stumbling into the apartment, slamming the door. Ilera wouldn't look at Dante now. "Go home," she whispered. "Ilera, please, just go." He left, got back in his car, told his driver to move. But sitting in leather seats in his fortress of wealth and power, Dante felt something crack open inside his chest, something that hurt worse than bullets ever had. In that single moment, Dante realized not all monsters were strangers. If you were in Dante's shoes, would you have stepped in or walked away? Dante couldn't sleep. He stood at his penthouse window watching the city sprawl below, like a kingdom he'd conquered but never understood. Rain had stopped. Dawn crept across rooftops. Somewhere out there, Ilera was probably awake too, getting ready for another shift, another day of survival. He made a call. "I need information," he told his man. "The waitress at La Sera." "Ilera. Everything." "Boss, you sure?" "Everything." The file arrived by noon. Thin. Sad. The kind of story that happens 1,000 times in cities like this, invisible to people who don't want to see. Mother deceased. Cancer. Died 5 years ago after losing her job at Morelli Industries. Blacklisted for supposed embezzlement she didn't commit. No pension. No insurance. Medical bills that swallowed their savings and then their dignity. Ilera had been 22, working 3 jobs, watching her mother die slowly while knowing the truth. She'd been set up. A scapegoat for someone else's crimes. Dante read it twice. Then he checked the dates against his family's records. Cross-referenced departments. Followed the paper trail that powerful people always leave when they think they're untouchable. The name he found made his blood run cold. Vincent Caruso, his father's oldest associate. The man who'd sat at family dinners, who'd attended his mother's funeral, who'd helped Dante take over the business when he was too young and too angry to ask hard questions. Vincent had embezzled $500,000 from the construction division. Covered it up by framing Ilera's mother, Maria Santos, a secretary who'd noticed inconsistencies in the books, a woman who'd worked there 15 years, a woman with a daughter and cancer and no way to fight men with lawyers and connections. They'd crushed her quietly, efficiently. The way you crush insects you don't even notice dying. And Dante had let it happen. Not actively, not knowingly, but he'd been in charge. The company bore his name. The profits filled his accounts. He'd been too busy consolidating power to audit old cases, too focused on making people fear him to wonder who his empire was built on. Maria Santos had died broken, and blamed. Her daughter had inherited nothing but debt and the knowledge that justice was for people with money. Dante sat in his office holding that file, and for the first time since he was a child, he felt something like shame. His phone buzzed. Vincent calling about some deal, voice cheerful, talking about profits like everything was normal. Dante hung up mid-sentence. He thought about every time Alara had served him, every cold response, every wall she'd built. She'd looked at him and seen exactly what he was, part of the machine that destroyed people like her. She hadn't been rude. She'd been truthful, and he thought it was fascinating. He poured scotch he didn't drink, watched the sun climb higher. The city gleamed below, beautiful and corrupt, built on bones nobody bothered to count. His whole life, he believed in a certain kind of order. You took power. You kept power. You didn't ask where it came from because that was weakness. But sitting there with that file, Dante understood something new and terrible. Power wasn't strength. It was just distance from consequences. And he'd been so far away, he'd never felt the ground shake when people fell. He called his lawyer, then his accountant, then the private investigator he used for sensitive matters. I need everything on Vincent Caruso, he said. Every crime, every lie, every corner he's cut. I want documentation that would bury him in federal prison. Boss, he's family. He's nothing. Get it done. Dante hung up and looked at the file one more time. At Maria's employee photo. She looked like her daughter. Same eyes. Same quiet strength that photographs can't quite capture. I'm sorry, he whispered to a dead woman who'd never hear it. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry was what cowards said when they weren't ready to change anything. Her pain had his family's fingerprints all over it. Would you confront the truth if it revealed you were part of someone else's suffering? Dante waited outside La Sera after closing. Not in his car, on the street. Rain threatened again, but hadn't started. He stood under the awning like some nervous kid instead of the man who owned half the neighborhood. Alara came out and stopped when she saw him. I'm not getting in your car, she said. I'm not asking you to. He gestured to the restaurant. Can we talk? Inside. We're closed. I know the owner. She almost smiled. Almost. Of course you do. They sat at her usual section. Lights were dim. Chairs stacked on other tables. The place felt different, empty, like a stage after the show ends and all the pretending stops. I know about your mother, Dante said. Alara went very still. I know what happened at Morelli Industries. I know who really stole that money. I know why she was fired, why she couldn't fight back, why she died the way she did. Good for you. Her voice could have cut glass. You want a medal for figuring out what everyone already knew? That men like you destroy people like her and call it business. I want to fix it. You can't fix death. No, but I can fix the record. I can clear her name. I can make sure the person responsible pays. What? She leaned forward, eyes burning. Why now? Why do you suddenly care? You've had years to audit your company, years to notice. But you didn't. None of you did. Because it didn't matter. Because we didn't matter. Every word landed like a punch. You're right, he said. She blinked, surprised. You're right about all of it. I didn't look. I didn't care. I was too busy building an empire to wonder what it was built on. Your mother was invisible to me. You would have been invisible too, except I walked into a restaurant and you had the nerve to treat me like I wasn't special. You're not. I know that now. Silence stretched between them. Outside, rain finally started. Soft at first, then harder. The sound filled the empty restaurant like static. What do you want from me? Alara asked quietly. Nothing. I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm not here to make you grateful. I'm here because you deserve to know that I know. That somebody with power finally looked at what power costs. She studied his face for a long time, looking for lies, maybe, looking for angles. But Dante had learned something from her. Truth hits harder when you're not trying to charm anyone. My mother used to say good men don't exist in places like this, Alara said. Just men who haven't been caught yet. She was probably right. So what are you? Good or not caught? I'm trying to figure that out. Alara stood, walked to the window, watched rain streak the glass. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet he almost missed it. You didn't care to know. For words. They hit him harder than accusations would have. Harder than screaming. Because they were simply true. He'd had all the power in the world, and he'd used it to not see. I'm sorry, he said. Sorry doesn't pay back medical bills. Sorry doesn't give me my mother back. Sorry doesn't erase 5 years of knowing that nobody cared whether she lived or died. I know. Do you? She turned to face him. Because men like you say sorry and think it's enough. Like words cost you something. But they don't. Not really. You'll walk out of here and go back to your penthouse and your power and your life where consequences are things that happen to other people. Dante stood, moved toward her, stopped when she held up a hand. I'm going to destroy the man who destroyed her, he said. I'm going to clear her name in every record. I'm going to make sure everyone knows she was innocent. I can't bring her back, but I can give you truth. On paper. Official. Permanent. And then what? You get to feel like a hero. No. Then I get to live knowing I did one decent thing in a life full of terrible ones. Rain drummed harder. The restaurant's old pipes creaked. Somewhere in the kitchen, a refrigerator hummed. Alara looked at him with eyes that had stopped believing in good endings long ago. Do whatever you want, she said. You will anyway. She walked past him toward the door. Alara. She stopped but didn't turn around. For what it's worth, I wish I'd known her. Your mother. She raised someone who knows the difference between power and strength. That's rare. Alara's shoulders shook once. Just once. Then she straightened and left without another word. Dante stood alone in the empty restaurant, listening to rain and his own breathing. That night, Dante realized silence could be a punishment sharper than bullets. Can truth heal the damage that power creates? Share your thoughts below. Dante started with the files. 3 a.m, alone in his office, going through records most people didn't know existed. Bank statements, wire transfers, property deeds bought through shell companies. Vincent Caruso had been stealing for 15 years, and he'd been sloppy about it. Arrogant, really. The kind of sloppy that comes from believing nobody will ever check your work. Dante checked everything. By sunrise, he had enough evidence to bury Vincent in court for decades. Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, money laundering. The list read like a career criminal's resume, which is exactly what it was. He called a meeting. His inner circle arrived, looking confused. These gatherings usually meant expansion or war. They sat around the table in Dante's private office, expensive suits and expensive watches, men who'd built fortunes on loyalty to the Morelli name. Vincent's out, Dante said without preamble. Silence. Then nervous laughter, like maybe this was a joke they didn't understand yet. Boss, Vincent's been with us since he framed an innocent woman to cover his own crimes. Since he stole from us and blamed someone who couldn't fight back. Since he turned our name into something people should fear instead of respect. People do fear us, someone said. That's the problem. More silence. Uncomfortable now. The men exchanged glances that said their boss had finally cracked. Dante slid the evidence across the table. Look at it. All of it. Then tell me I'm wrong. They looked. Their faces changed as they read. Confusion turned to shock, turned to something like understanding. These were criminals, sure, but they had codes. Rules. You didn't frame civilians. You didn't hide behind the innocent. That was coward work. What do you want to do? His lawyer asked carefully. I want him arrested. Prosecuted. I want every stolen dollar traced and every lie exposed. And I want Maria Santos' name cleared in every record, every database, every piece of documentation that called her a thief. That's declaring war on our own family. Then we're at war. The room erupted. Voices overlapping, some angry, some scared. Dante let them argue. Let them process. He'd known this wouldn't be easy. Power doesn't like looking at itself in mirrors. If we do this, his accountant said slowly, the feds will start looking at everything. All of us. Every operation. Then we clean those up too. You're serious. Completely. One by one, they fell silent, looking at Dante like he'd become a stranger. Maybe he had. Maybe the man who'd walked into La Sera months ago wouldn't recognize who he was becoming. Anyone who can't handle this new direction can leave, Dante said quietly. No hard feelings. Take a severance. Walk away. But if you stay because we're building something different. Something that doesn't crush innocent people to save ourselves. 3 men left that day. The rest stayed, though he could see doubt in their eyes. Vincent came to see him personally. Walked into Dante's office like he owned it, smiling, confident, ready to talk his way out of whatever this was. Kid, what's this about? Your guys are acting strange. I know what you did to Maria Santos. Vincent's smile faltered, just for a second. Then it was back, practiced, easy. Ancient history. That woman stole from us. We handled it. She didn't steal anything. You did. Dante, listen. No, you listen. Dante stood, and something in his posture made Vincent step back. You framed her. You destroyed her. You killed her as surely as if you'd pulled a trigger. And you did it because it was convenient. Because she was nobody and you were somebody, and that meant her life didn't matter. This is business. You know how it works. It doesn't work like that anymore. Vincent laughed. Actually laughed. You've gone soft. That waitress really got to you, huh? I heard about your little visits. Men are talking, Dante, saying you've lost your edge over some girl who. Dante moved fast, had Vincent against the wall, forearm across his throat, eyes cold in a way that made the older man remember exactly who he was dealing with. You're done. Your accounts are frozen. Your assets are being seized. The FBI has everything. And when they're finished with you, when you're sitting in a cell wondering how this happened, I want you to remember something. What? Vincent wheezed. That it wasn't the law that caught you. It was conscience. Dante released him. Vincent stumbled, gasping, rage and fear warring in his eyes. You'll regret this, he spat. Maybe, but at least I'll be able to sleep. Security escorted Vincent out. Dante watched from his window as the old man was driven away, shouting threats nobody cared about anymore. His phone buzzed. Messages from associates. Some supportive, most worried, a few outright hostile. His empire was fracturing. People were choosing sides. Power was slipping through his fingers like sand. He should have felt panic. Instead, he felt something almost like peace. But justice, once awakened, demands a price. Would you risk everything to make things right? Comment yes or no. The news broke on a Tuesday. Prominent businessman arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Vincent Caruso's face plastered across every screen in the city. Details emerging like water through a cracked dam. 15 years of corruption. Dozens of victims. Names being cleared. Lawsuits being reopened. And buried in the 4th paragraph of the story, Maria Santos, previously accused of embezzlement, officially exonerated. Records corrected. Reputation restored. Alara heard about it at the restaurant. The cook had the news on in the kitchen. She was carrying dirty plates when she heard her mother's name. Stopped so suddenly that dishes rattled. Stood there frozen while the reporter explained how new evidence had surfaced, how the real criminal had been caught, how justice was finally being served. You okay? The cook asked. She nodded. Couldn't speak. Just nodded and kept working because that's what you do when the world shifts and you're still standing in it. But her hands shook the rest of the night. She didn't know Dante was behind it. The news mentioned anonymous tips, sealed evidence, sources who'd requested confidentiality. She didn't know he'd spent weeks building the case. Didn't know he'd threatened and bribed and called in every favor to make sure the story ran with Maria's name cleared. All she knew was that after 5 years of people believing her mother was a thief, suddenly they knew the truth. Dante watched the news from his office. Alone. His inner circle had scattered. Half his operation had shut down voluntarily while they waited to see if the feds would keep digging. His phone used to ring constantly. Now it sat silent on his desk, a monument to how fast power evaporates. He'd gotten what he wanted. Vincent was going to prison. Maria's name was cleared. The truth was public and permanent. So why did victory feel so much like loss? His men avoided eye contact now. Some had left outright. Word on the street was that Dante Morelli had gone soft, that he'd chosen a dead woman's reputation over his own empire. Respect turned to questions. Questions turned to challenges. Two rival families had already started pushing into territories he used to control. He was losing everything, and he couldn't bring himself to care. His accountant called with news. Assets were bleeding value. Properties being sold. Legitimate businesses distancing themselves from the Morelli name. Everything he'd built for 20 years was crumbling. "We can salvage this," the accountant said, "but you need to show strength. Remind people who you are." "I'm trying to figure that out," Dante said and hung up. He poured scotch. Didn't drink it. Just watched it sit there catching lamplight. Golden and expensive and meaningless. His father had once told him that power was the only thing that mattered. That empires were built on fear and maintained through strength. That sentiment was weakness and weakness was death. Looking at his reflection in the window, Dante wondered what his father would think of him now. Probably disappointment. Probably disgust. But his father had also built an empire that needed scapegoats like Maria Santos to function. That crushed people because it was easier than being honest. That measured success in how many people were afraid instead of how many people were protected. Maybe disappointment was the right response. Maybe he should have disappointed that man years ago. Somewhere across the city, Alara finished her shift, went home to an apartment that still felt too small and too expensive, sat on her bed with a news article pulled up on her phone, reading her mother's name over and over. Maria Santos. Innocent. Exonerated. Truth. She cried for the first time in years. Not sad tears exactly. Something more complicated. Relief mixed with rage, mixed with exhaustion that had nowhere left to go now that the fight was over. Her mother would never know. Would never see this vindication. Would never get her job back or her health back or her life back. But her name was clean. And that had to mean something. It had to. Dante sat in his fracturing empire, alone with his conscience. Alara sat in her tiny apartment, alone with her grief. Miles apart, connected by justice that came too late and cost too much. Sometimes victory feels exactly like loss. Have you ever made a choice that cost you everything but gave you peace? Let's talk about it. Dante came back to La Sera on a Thursday. Same table, same time, but everything felt different now. The hostess seated him with less fear and more pity. Other diners glanced his way with curiosity instead of terror. Word had spread. The Morelli Empire was cracking. Dante himself had done the cracking. He ordered water. Waited. Different waitress brought it. "Where's Alara?" he asked. The woman hesitated. "She doesn't work here anymore." Something cold settled in his chest. "Since when?" 3 days ago. Just told the manager she was done and left. "Did she say where?" "Sir, I really don't know." He sat there for an hour. Ordered food he didn't eat. Left cash on the table that was triple the bill. The manager approached nervously as he was leaving. "Mr. Morelli, there's something?" Alara left this. He held out an envelope. Said to give it to you if you came back. Dante took it carefully like it might disintegrate. His name written on the front in careful handwriting. He waited until he was in his car before opening it. The letter was short. "Mr. Morelli, I saw the news. I know you're the reason my mother's name is clear. I don't know why you did it. Maybe guilt. Maybe you're trying to be someone better than you were. Maybe you just want to see if power could fix what power broke. It can't. But thank you anyway. I'm leaving the city. Starting over somewhere nobody knows my story or my mother's story or what it cost us to survive this long. I'm tired of serving people who have everything while I have nothing. I'm tired of being grateful for scraps. I'm tired of waiting for my life to start. You asked me once why I worked so hard. Here's the real answer. Because I didn't want to become my mother. Someone who tried to do everything right and got destroyed anyway. Someone whose only mistake was being powerless when powerful people needed a scapegoat. But I learned something from you. Power means nothing until it protects the powerless. You used yours to tell the truth. That's more than most people with power ever do. I hope you figure out who you want to be. I hope it's someone who would make that choice again, even when nobody's watching. Goodbye, Alara." Dante read it 3 times, sitting in his car outside the restaurant where everything had started. His driver didn't interrupt, just sat quietly while his boss's shoulders shook once, twice, then went still again. He folded the letter carefully, put it in his jacket pocket over his heart. Where to, boss? Home, Dante said quietly. The penthouse felt enormous and empty. He stood at the window looking at the city like he had 1,000 times before. But everything looked different now. All those lights, all those lives, all that complexity he'd reduced to territory and power and control. Somewhere out there, Alara was packing. Or maybe already gone. Starting fresh in some other city where nobody knew what she'd survived. He wanted to chase her. Find her. Explain that she'd changed him in ways he was still discovering. That her refusal to be impressed had made him want to be impressive for real instead of through fear. But that would be selfish. She'd earned her escape, earned her fresh start, earned a life where powerful men weren't constantly taking pieces of her. So he let her go. The letter stayed in his pocket. He'd touch it sometimes without thinking, like making sure it was still real. Proof that she'd existed. Proof that she'd seen something in him worth acknowledging, even if it was just potential. His lawyer called with more bad news. More associates leaving. More territory lost. The empire continuing its slow collapse. We can still turn this around, the lawyer said, sounding less convinced each time. Maybe we shouldn't, Dante replied. Silence on the other end. Then, boss, are you okay? I'm figuring that out. He hung up and read the letter again. Power means nothing until it protects the powerless. 7 words that had rewritten everything he thought he knew about strength. Rain started outside, the same kind that had brought them together. Dante watched it streak his windows and thought about a waitress who'd treated him like a person instead of a myth, who demanded truth instead of charm, who'd survived things that should have broken her and still had the dignity to say goodbye with grace. In her leaving, she gave him something he'd never known. Conscience. In her leaving, she gave him something he'd never known. Conscience. Would you have forgiven him? Tell me below. 6 months passed like seasons nobody noticed. Dante came back to La Sera on a rainy Tuesday. No driver this time. No security. Just a man in a coat that wasn't quite expensive enough to draw attention. Walking through doors he used to enter like a king. The hostess didn't recognize him. Table for one, she asked. Please. She seated him at a different section. He didn't correct her. Just sat down and looked at the table where Alara used to serve him. Someone else worked that section now. A college kid, probably younger, less tired. Nobody who'd looked at him and seen straight through his armor. He ordered pasta, ate slowly. The food tasted the same, but felt different. Or maybe he was different. Hard to tell anymore. The city had changed without him. Or maybe it had stayed exactly the same, and he'd just stopped pretending to own it. 2 families had divided his old territory. His remaining assets had been sold or dissolved. The Morelli name still meant something in certain circles, but more like a cautionary tale than a threat. He'd become ordinary, and it was the most peaceful he'd ever been. His days looked nothing like they used to. No meetings, no power plays, no soldiers reporting in. He'd rented a modest apartment in a neighborhood where nobody knew him. Started reading books he'd never had time for. Started noticing things like weather and seasons and the way light changed throughout the day. He'd donated most of his money, quietly, through lawyers and trusts. Scholarships in Maria Santos's name. Programs for families dealing with medical debt. Support systems for people crushed by systems that needed crushing back. It didn't fix anything. Didn't bring anyone back. Didn't erase the years of damage his empire had caused. But it was something. The waitress brought his check. He left a generous tip, but not an absurd one. Nothing that would draw questions. To someone who understood what it meant to work hard for money that disappears too fast. He walked home through rain that felt cleansing somehow. Past buildings he used to own and streets he used to control. The city hummed around him, indifferent to his presence. It was surprisingly freeing. His apartment was small. 1 bedroom. Kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. But the windows faced east, and morning light filled the rooms with something that felt almost like hope. He kept Alara's letter in a drawer beside his bed. Didn't read it much anymore. Didn't need to. The words had become part of him, like a compass he'd finally learned to follow. Sometimes he wondered where she was. If she'd found what she was looking for. If starting over had given her the peace she'd earned. He hoped so. Hoped she was somewhere serving people who treated her with respect. Somewhere her past didn't follow like a shadow. He never tried to find her. That was important. She'd drawn a line, and he'd respected it. Maybe the first boundary he'd respected in his entire adult life. The restaurant table became a ritual. Once a month, he'd go back to La Sera. Sit, eat, remember. Not with sadness exactly, more like acknowledgement. This was where he'd learned that power and strength were different things. That fear and respect weren't the same. That you could build empires on bones and still sleep soundly until someone made you look at what you'd built. The manager recognized him eventually. Older now, grayer. He approached Dante's table one evening with careful steps. "Mr. Morelli, good to see you." "Just Dante," he said. "I'm not that person anymore. I heard you've changed things." "I'm trying." The manager nodded. Stood there like he wanted to say more, but didn't know how. "She doing okay?" Dante asked quietly. "Alara, have you heard? She sends a postcard sometimes. From different places. Last one was from Oregon. She's going to college. Social work, I think. Says she wants to help people." Dante smiled. Really smiled. "That sounds right. She never mentioned you. But she always asked if you still came around." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you sit alone at the same table. That you're different now. That maybe people can change after all." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Rain picked up outside. The restaurant filled with the familiar sounds of strangers eating and talking and living their lives. "Thank you," Dante said. The manager nodded and walked away. Dante finished his meal, left through doors that no longer parted like the Red Sea, walked home through streets that no longer feared his name, and felt, for the first time in decades, like maybe he was building something worth keeping. Not an empire, just a life. But even peace carries an echo, and his was her name. If you believe people can change, double tap that like button. The fire crackled soft in the stone hearth, casting shadows that danced like memories across old walls. An elderly man sat in a worn leather chair, the kind that remembers the shape of the person who's claimed it over years. His hands, weathered and quiet, rested on the armrests. His eyes held the particular sadness of someone who'd lived long enough to understand what they'd lost and why. 3 young faces watched him from across the room. Grandchildren, maybe, or students, or just people who'd heard he had a story worth hearing. "So that's it?" one of them asked. "He just changed." The old man smiled. "Change isn't magic. It's a choice you make every single day, even when nobody's watching. Especially when nobody's watching." "But did he ever see her again?" Another pressed. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters." The old man looked into the fire, watching flames consume wood and turn it to something else entirely. Some people come into your life to save you from yourself. Not by fixing you, not by loving you, just by showing you who you've become and giving you the chance to choose someone different. "That's not an answer," the first voice said. "It's the only answer there is." He reached into his jacket pocket. The movement was careful, deliberate. When his hand emerged, it held a folded piece of paper, worn soft from years of handling. The creases had nearly given way in places. The ink had faded to something between brown and gray. He didn't unfold it. Didn't need to. The words were written somewhere deeper than paper now. "Alara went on to help a lot of people," he said quietly. "Built programs for families dealing with medical debt. Fought systems that crushed the powerless. Lived the kind of life that makes the world a little less cruel. She never stopped being who she was in that restaurant. Someone who told the truth even when it was dangerous." And Dante, the old man's eyes gleamed in the firelight. Could have been tears. Could have been just reflection. Dante learned that power doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears an apron and carries a notepad and tells you exactly who you are when you least want to hear it. He spent the rest of his life trying to be worthy of that moment, try to protect people instead of control them, trying to use whatever influence he had left to make sure fewer mothers died blamed for crimes they didn't commit. Did he succeed? He tried. That's more than most people with power ever do. One of the young listeners leaned forward. "You talk about him like you knew him." The old man smiled, said nothing. Outside, rain began, the same kind that had started this whole story. The kind that washes cities clean and makes everything feel possible and hopeless at the same time. "The world tells you power is about control," the old man said. "About making people bend. about building empires nobody can touch. And maybe that's one kind of power, but it's hollow. It echoes in empty rooms and dies the moment you do. He looked at each of them in turn. Real power is what Alara had. The power to look at someone who could destroy you and refuse to pretend they're more than they are. The power to survive systems designed to break you and still have dignity left to give. The power to walk away from people who want to own you and build something nobody can take. So what's the moral? Someone asked. That waitresses are stronger than mob bosses? The moral, the old man said carefully, is that strength isn't about who you can hurt. It's about who you protect when nobody's making you. It's about looking at what you've built and asking if you want to live in a world full of people like you. He stood slowly, bones protesting decades of living. Walked to the window. Rain painted the glass in streaks that looked almost like tears. Dante Morelli died quietly, he said. No headloans, no funeral procession. Just a man who'd once been feared and ended up ordinary. He left everything to programs with Maria Santos' name on them. His empire scattered to dust. His reputation became a whisper. That's sad. Is it? The old man turned from the window. He chose truth over territory, conscience over control. He died knowing he'd done one genuinely good thing. How many powerful people can say that? The fire popped. Someone added another log. Outside, the storm intensified, the kind of weather that makes you grateful for walls and warmth. Did Alara ever know? The quietest listener asked. Everything he did. The old man touched his pocket where the letter rested. I think she knew exactly what she'd done. Knew that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is hold up a mirror to someone and make them look. He moved toward the door. Story finished. Lesson delivered. The way these things always end, with questions instead of answers. Remember this, he said, hand on the doorframe. Power doesn't need applause. Real power, the kind that changes things, works in silence. It protects people who'll never know your name. It fixes systems quietly. It tells truth to those who don't want to hear it. And if someone doesn't change, if they choose power over people. The old man looked back one last time. His eyes held the weight of lifetimes lived and choices made and consequences accepted. Then they die powerful and alone. And the world forgets them the moment they're gone. He disappeared into the hall, leaving them with firelight and rain and the kind of story that settles into your bones and changes how you see the world. On the mantel, barely visible in the flickering shadows, sat a framed photo. A young woman in a waitress uniform, tired eyes, quiet strength. Beside it, a scholarship announcement bearing the name Maria Santos. Enfolded carefully in a drawer nobody would open until the old man was gone. A letter that began with simple words, "Power means nothing until it protects the powerless." The fire burned lower. The rain continued. The story ended the way all true stories end. Not with certainty, but with the possibility that tomorrow could be different if someone chose to make it so. Quiet justice doesn't need applause, just conscience. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there might need to hear it tonight. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might inspire someone who needs hope today. We're building a family here, and your voice matters. See you in the next story.